Enrichment Officer at the Melbourne Graduate School of Education. So I help facilitate activities like today. So you can contact me at mgsc-experience@unimelb.edu.au. So today's session is really about providing advice and support for our Master of Teaching students nearing the end of their degree and starting to wonder and get into the wonderful process of job hunting, interviews and applications and everything like that. So we've partnered with the experts from the Australian Education Union and the Independent Education Union who will be presenting today. So we've got Adam Cermak from, who is the Student and Graduate Organiser from the Australian Education Union, and Jackie Scott, the Early Career Teacher Officer from the Independent Education Union. So welcome Adam and Jackie. Before I quickly hand over to you, I will just let you know as well, if we just jump to the next slide. So the university has a great careers and employability service team. So they provide a range of tailored advice and support for students at the end of their degrees in all different faculties. So you can quickly see there some of the things that they provide: specialised advice, career programmings, etc. So you can contact them at students.unimelb.edu.au/careers. But we'll get into some more specific detail from Adam and Jackie today. So I'll hand over to Adam and Jackie now. Welcome everybody.
Thanks, Taylor. Thanks for having me today, and welcome everyone. I just want to start off by also acknowledging the traditional landowners on where I'm meeting today. I'm on the Wurundjeri people's land where I live. If you want to share your respects or where you're joining us from today in the chat box, that's a really nice way to start the session. It's a real privilege to be able to live and work here. We all live where we work at the moment for most of us, so or study. So it's yeah, I've actually found lately the connection to place has been really lovely with the 5K radius. I've explored my neighbourhood and the natural surrounds a lot more and got a kind of deeper appreciation of where I live rather than just sort of, you know, being where I sleep when I'm not working. So thanks for having us. Jackie, I'm going to get you to quickly introduce yourself as well, because I'm supported by a brilliant colleague at the IEU today.
Hey everyone, I'm Jackie Scott from the Independent Education Union. I'm our early career teacher officer, so I do a similar role as Adam, but in the non-government sector. Adam will be taking the lead today, mostly because the public school job process is quite complicated, as you might be across already, and in the non-government sector I'll just fill in some of the differences there, but it's a little bit easier. But I will be mostly in the chat box there facilitating that, so if you do have any questions that come up along the way, I'll be watching that space, and either I can reply into the chat box if it's an easy one, or if I think it's worth everyone having a quick chat about, then we might leave it to the end, and I'll field those questions to either myself or Adam to answer at the end.
Sounds great. So we're going to aim to fit the bulk of the session into the hour and a half today, allowing for some differentiation between the different sectors and early childhood as well. Yeah, my background is I'm a primary school teacher, and the information that I'm bringing today comes from, I guess, my time applying for jobs, my time on panels. The school I was at was a growing school, and I had quite a number of opportunities to interview. In particular, we had a lot of graduate teachers at the school. Yeah, had that experience on panels, but really my more recent work working with the AEU, we've got principals as part of our union as well. So principals, teachers and education support staff in public schools are all part of our union. And the principals tell me all the time what they're looking for and what they're not looking for. And I'll start off by saying that sometimes it's a little bit contradictory as well. So different leaders are going to have different views around what they're looking for in a graduate, what they like in an application, what they don't like. And similarly, so what I've tried to do is we're going to bring together our views as well to add to it. My best advice for you is get a range of perspectives on it, because the reality is you're all unique, you're all individual, you have your own backgrounds and interests and passions and achievements in life to celebrate in terms of your application. So your application is going to be quite unique, and you really should be aiming for what really suits you the best. So I reckon there's a lot of stuff in here that's very useful in terms of the system, but there's something you go, well, actually, I would like to present it this way. That's okay as well. Or maybe a mentor teacher has had a different perspective. I come across a range of perspectives in my work all the time. And I'm really just trying to give you a good broad brush around the government system in particular. But the other thing I thought as you can see on the screen what we're going to cover today, there'll be a couple of things that we probably won't get time for. And really, in Jackie and my work, we're not necessarily field experts in that. And that is, I noticed there's a couple of pre-questions around teacher registration process, so VIT. We could, they really should be spending hours with you explaining that to you as prospective registering teachers. So they'll, but really I encourage you to reach out to the VIT, the Victorian Institute of Teaching, for questions around teacher registration, for questions around if you're concerned about your levels of professional placement or the timeline for getting your registration approved. I know some people are keen, I know you're keen to get out there and you know that you need to be registered before you can work as a teacher. In terms of the job application process, I would say though, if you're looking, say, at teaching at the start of next year in a school, the main thing is that you have your VIT process by the time you start. So you can absolutely apply, absolutely interview and be selected for a job before you're registered as a teacher. The requirement would be just by day one of that contract, when you start your employment, that your teacher registration is sorted out. So that's as much as I'll kind of delve in there, but I do encourage you, and if, Jackie, if you want to pop a link in for the VIT, they've got a really informative website, but they're also, they're the registering body, they're the responsible authority on it. So it's probably best to seek individual advice around teacher registration concerns. So let's jump in. I've got a lot to cover, and Jackie, anytime you need, just jump in and ask me questions along the way. I'll try not to look at the chat box because it can be quite distracting. Look, the reason we're doing this, I suppose, as a union, it's my job's I'm employed by our members. We've got 49,000 members in Victoria. Jackie's employed by members as well. The members have said, we think that student teachers have a pretty tough time transitioning from university to work, and they need some support, and we want to help them to get their jobs and get started in our industry. And so we want to have these roles. And so that's why part of my role is doing this work and giving my time or being paid to work today. So I'm not volunteering, it's in my job. But I'm employed by 49,000 people who are out there, your future colleagues who really want to support you coming into the profession and have asked, that's something that the union provides. So that's really what we're here for. I encourage you also to think about being a student member of your union because it's free. We've got some other training which I'll plug later on because what we cover today won't be enough. Undoubtedly you'll want more, and we'll stick around for questions at the end, but you might want to come back to another date. We've got some recorded sessions that we've done recently you can access, as well as some other sources of support in terms of live events. So we'll give those a bit of a plug, but you can see where we're going to go through today, all the way through finding jobs, application writing, and then onto the interview process. Rightio. So the first thing you'll need to know for Victorian government school jobs is this website, Recruitment Online. Maybe just so I know you're alive and awake this morning, you've had some caffeine, just if you can let us know in the chat box if you've seen Recruitment Online or you're aware of Recruitment Online. I had a bit of a chuckle with Recruitment Online just over last weekend. They did an update, and I saw the email saying that they were going to be updating the awesome. Some people have been on there. For as long as I've been in teaching, there's been issues with Recruitment Online in terms of it being a little bit less modern in terms of the website. And just last weekend, the department had heralded an update to the process. So we thought, great, it's going to be a bit more streamlined. It looks pretty similar to me. If you've been looking at it recently, it hasn't changed a great deal. So it is still a little bit like, for example, back buttons don't seem to work properly when you're looking for a job. But the good thing about Recruitment Online is every single Victorian government school job is going to get advertised through there. So principal teacher roles, education support worker roles, everything must go through there. If it's longer than 30 days or 6 weeks, it's advertised on Recruitment Online, and you have to apply through that portal to get a job in a government school. They employ roughly 2,500 graduates every year, so it's by far and away the biggest employer of teachers in the state. An awesome place to work, I have to say. Being a graduate teacher in the government system was a fantastic start for me in terms of my teaching career. So if you're thinking about working in government system, have a look in there. Mostly teacher roles you'll be looking at probably, but there are also some early childhood roles that you'll find in there. A couple of things to be mindful of around recruitment online before I hand over to Jackie. If you're clever like Ben, you can sign up for register as a user and then set up a profile, and you can save your searches. It just means you don't have to deal with the website clunkily kind of clicking through. You can see the kinds of jobs that are on there. You can see how you can filter the jobs. So you'll be looking for teacher jobs or particular subject or areas depending on where you're going. And then you can also limit by local government area, I think is a really good search. So you think about what local government area you live in or plan to live in or are happy to travel to, and you can add those parameters into the search as well. Really, I think early on, like start broad. There might be a school that you're absolutely dead set got your heart on, or you're not happy to travel very far, but probably casting your net widely at least gives you a sense of what jobs are out there that you can apply to. And once you've done your application, the application gets uploaded into against that job on Recruitment Online. And we'll come to that a little bit further down the track. But at this stage, if you've never heard of it, jump on, have a bit of a click around Recruitment Online. Not right now, because you'll be so enthralled with our session. Later on today, get onto Recruitment Online, have a click around, have a look at the different features that are on there, see what jobs are out there. Even if you're not really at the stage where you want to start thinking about, you're thinking, Adam, I've still got, X amount of essays to go. I can't even think about it. It's an easy first step. It'll just give you a bit of a heads up around what it looks like, what to expect, and at least you'll be a little bit familiar with the site. As a first step, it's a really good one. One other thing about Recruitment Online, couple of things to keep an eye out for. So when you see this is a job position, this school, William Ruthven College, looking for a Italian classroom teacher. It's a part-time role, and I can see that because normally if it's full-time, it would say 38 hours. It's got 15 hours, 15.2 hours of work in a week for that role. So it's not a full-time Italian teacher role. I can see it's a fixed term, so that means it's a contract position, and I can see the start and end date. So important things to check to see if, for example, that one's from the 27th of January. So I would be assuming if I'm studying now, I should be able to get my registration done for the start of term next term 1, 2021. So check that. You've got a contact person as well if you've got any questions around the school. Scrolling down from there, you can see a lovely profile about the school that's written by the school. So you can start to get some ideas around language and what that workplace is like. And then further down, you'll see the key selection criteria, which we're going to spend quite a bit of time with today because they are your key to getting an interview and getting selected for a government school position. One other thing that I want to point out for you is when you're searching on Recruitment Online, you'll see some jobs advertised in the government GRD or it's a graduate recruitment program position. Basically, in education, you'll find graduate can refer to a few different things depending on who's talking about it. It might be in our workplace agreement, it says in your first year, you're considered a graduate and entitled to a mentor and a reduction in duties in government schools. But in the case of Recruitment Online, it's a little bit different. For the graduate recruitment program, you can apply for those roles in your first 4 years after you finish study. So say I'm graduating from University of Melbourne at the end of this year. I've got 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, I can apply for those roles. And then 2025, I wouldn't be eligible to apply for those roles anymore. So you've got basically a 4-year window to apply for those jobs. And it basically cuts out the competition for you. So it means you're only really applying against other people with less experience as a teacher. That said, absolutely, if there's a job at a school, this one isn't a graduate role at William Ruthven, I'd absolutely be applying for that job if that was what I wanted to do, because it's not uncommon for graduates to get other teaching roles in the system. But absolutely, you'd be applying for graduate roles that you're interested in, as well as the other roles that are out there. You've just got a little bit less competition when you're applying for graduate roles. So Jack, I'm going to hand over to you around where we might find the jobs, and then I'll start talking a little bit about the written application process.
Thanks, Adam. We do actually have a quick question while you're on Recruitment Online. Lauren has asked if a school has multiple jobs advertised to apply for them each individually.
Good question. So Lauren, absolutely, yes. I've had a situation where, so what happens with Recruitment Online, it's when they appoint a person to that role, the principal or the business manager has to log in and say, Lauren got this role. And if you've only applied against one role, and there might be 10 great people who have all applied against that one, you didn't put your application against another classroom teacher position, for example, they can't allocate you to it. So you've got to make sure if there's more than one role, so it might be a primary school that's employing a number of teachers, or a large secondary college with a couple of English roles, any role that you think you want to apply for, you upload the application. Do not rewrite it every time. Unless it's maybe a different subject area, you might have 2 subject specialisations in secondary and you want to tweak your application to really emphasise some great examples from a different area for a different subject specialisation. But generally we would say you'd use the same application that you've written, and just on your cover letter, you just say regarding positions and put each position number in there. So this job ID is 1200495. I put that and I put comma and the next position number, save that as one PDF and upload it multiple times. So I'm only writing one application. The panel's only going to read it once, but then they'll put me in the mix for those interviews for those positions. So yeah, absolutely, if there's more than one position, apply.
Thanks, Adam. So with the non-government sector, it is a little bit different. You're not going to find those jobs on Recruitment Online. So where you do find them, I'll put the links in the chat for you, but I'll just tell you quickly. So Catholic schools are the next biggest sector after public schools, and they have their own website that they publish all of their jobs onto. It's www.cecv.catholic.edu.au. And then beyond that, for other non-government school jobs, you can find those on Seek or on the individual school website. Even in the paper, sometimes you'll still find them, and there is an independent schools website as well, so I'll give you the link to that one too. I'll just say now, but I'll come back to some of the other points that are different, but the key differences here, there's not always a key selection criteria in these jobs, which can be a big benefit if you're sick of doing those, but it does mean that your cover letter is a lot more important as well. So you really want to make sure that you've got that good. It really does vary though from school to school, so it's not going to be the same, it's not going to be as streamlined as you're going to find on Recruitment Online. And the reason for that is because all of the jobs in the public schools have got the same employer, so they've got the same application process, but when you move over to non-government, you're dealing with very many different employers there. So yeah, the applications as well as the interviews do vary. And I'll just talk a little bit later about that the pay conditions and expectations can vary as well, because that's something that you should definitely be aware of.
Yeah, and absolutely something we can help with as well. So I'll only elaborate a little bit. Early childhood is a similar to the non-government sector. So I'd be looking at, if there's a larger cluster employer in early childhood, I'd be looking at getting onto a list there if they've got one where you can get job alerts from them. So some of the bigger employers might do that. If it's your little neighbourhood local centre, then it might be a matter of keeping an eye on their newsletter or keeping an eye on Seek or the newspaper, wherever you find your job ads. Early childhood is similar. It's a little bit more, you're not going to find them all in one specific portal. And often your networks can be a really good heads up. So if you've had placement or a Catholic or independent school, a government school, early childhood setting, then keeping in contact with them is really valuable, I think, as well. I mean, you must apply through Recruitment Online or whatever the process is at that school, but getting a heads up there's a job coming, if they know that you're interested and you maybe would like to work there, then you might get a little bit of extra notice that a job is going to be advertised in the next few weeks, which gives you a little bit more time to think about what you might want to write in your application. So what might you write in your application? I'll talk about the government school process in a little bit of detail here in terms of what's expected, because I know there's a couple of questions around this and it's hard to know. It sometimes feels a little bit like how long's a piece of string. This is a bit of a guide for you in terms of what you should be aiming for in terms of your application, but actual results will vary. You're all very different. You'll all have different ways of communicating, different ways. Some of us write very concisely and to the point. Some of us will take a little bit longer to make our point. It's still just as valid. Some of us will have lots of examples that we're going to include in our CV, for example, and some will have not very many. So your application will look a little bit different, but this is as a general rule of thumb, when a principal or a panelist opens up a pile of applications and starts reading, this is kind of what they're going to expect to see. And absolutely, in terms of the key selection criteria in particular, if you haven't written to those, it's very unlikely that you're going to get proceed to the next stage in the selection process for a government school. So choose the advertised vacancy you wish to apply for. That's an easy first step, but do give it a little bit of thought around where you might want to be. Read the school profile, have a look at the school website. Sometimes it might just be, have a think about, is this the right fit for me? This is your first job in education. This is your start of your career. You want to start off on the right foot and you want to make sure that you're in the right setting for you. So doing a little bit of research and making sure you're comfortable that that's the school for you, not just any school, is a good start in terms of your wellbeing moving forward. You'll have a CV or resume, so it's just really a summary. What goes in there can be really varied. I would say for a government school system, you're probably going to look at having the front and back of an A4 piece of paper for your CV or resume. Some people will say, oh my God, Adam, how can I fill that up? I haven't done enough stuff to be able to fill up a front and back of an A4. And some of you will be at home going, Adam, what are you talking about? I've got 50 years experience in, as a biochemist, and I want to showcase that for my science teaching role. So, we're all coming from different backgrounds. We've all got different levels of experience. A4 front and back is a rough guide. But you want to try and keep it concise, because really, in terms of government schools, your written application, the key selection criterion is where we're really looking. In terms of what you're going to include in there, your work experience, professional placement experience, volunteer experience that you've got. If you've done some other additional or relevant training, is really useful as well. So if you've done some training on the side, you've got a certificate in your first aid, or you've done other lifeguarding quals or something like that, you might want to include that in there. You obviously got to have your contact details easily accessible, because if they're going to call you for an interview, they're going to be, they don't want to be digging through trying to find your details. So make sure you've got some contactable details on there where they can get to you. How much you include is really up to you. So I've seen some applications where you just have the placement. I think a better process is to say, 2017, I had a placement at blah, blah school. And then maybe a short sentence to say, I was teaching grade 3s, and this is the main focus that I had, or I got to participate in the following activities, or something just to paint a little bit more of a picture about what key achievements in this placement were, just to give a bit more information about what you're up to when you were there. And if you're starting to find the placement really matters, that your professional experience is going to be really important to the panel, and your other work experience is going to be really important to the panel. So if I'm talking about my other work, say, I don't know, I've worked in retail on the side, you could include that, but I would be wanting to point out the skills that I've used in my retail work that really translate into teaching. So it might be dealing with complaints or customer concerns. It might be time management, punctuality, reliability. It might be great service and, a friendly demeanour, working as part of a team, those sorts of things. They fit into teaching. Being good at racking jackets, not as relevant to teaching, although you do all kinds of stuff in the primary world from my experience, but we're not going to emphasise those skills. We're going to emphasise the skills that really translate into teaching. So the panel reading it go, yeah, okay, this person, they've worked in retail, but that's actually relevant to this because they're bringing these, it shows that they've got this real world work experience that they're bringing. So absolutely think about those transferable skills and paint them as the kinds of skills you'd expect a teacher to need, rather than what might help you to thrive in a retail environment. Following on from that, some referees. So we'd say 3 referees is a good rule of thumb. Some people have 2, some people have 4. I get a lot of questions around referees. I think the way you've got to think about it is the person is going to want to know if you're going to be a great teacher. So you need someone who's going to be able to comment on your teaching. So that's someone ideally who supervised you on your placement or had something to do with your professional placement and see you in action as a teacher. That's, as a panelist, that's the first thing I want to know. And then following that, if I've got someone else like a manager from another piece of work that I've done, you could add them in. So, but as a first preference, educational focus is important. And for some of you, you might be struggling to get 3, you could just go with 2. Some people have 4, that's okay. I think what is really good practice is to say why you've got them. So, for example, Julie supervised me on my final placement. She can attest to my ability to do this, this, or this. So that would be my my advice around referees. Whether they go into the CV or resume or on a separate piece of paper is up to you. For a lot of applicants, it might be, oh boy, I've still got to figure out these referees who I want to have. You can submit an application without the referees, and you can just put a note to say referees available on request. But if you've got them ready to go, put them in. And they could be on the resume, it could be separate. It's okay to put them on a separate piece of paper. If your resume or CV is looking pretty full, absolutely just do it as a separate piece of paper as part of your application. I don't really have there's a question around a template. We don't really have a template as such for resumes or CVs. I find, and even when I've written them, just if a brief Google search will show it up for you. You might even remember, and I think quite possibly when I graduated, he was still around, but there was Clippy in Word who would try to make you do everything, like, he'd pop up and say, I see you're writing a letter. I don't know if anyone's come across Clippy before, but basically Google or use a template from Word. It doesn't really matter. There's not one accepted template. The rule of thumb for you is how easy to navigate is this. If it's really elaborate, it's got lots of decorative bits and patterns, it's going to distract. That's probably not a very good template to use. Keeping it simple, keeping it concise, thinking about indenting, dot points, bolding headings, just to make it easy for that person to skim through and go, right, what's going on for this person? Where are they from? Is this the right person for me, for our job, for our school, our community? So that's the rule of thumb. And different people, you all have different looking resumes, guaranteed, and that's a good thing. We're all different communicators. Really, just think about that audience who you're writing for. They're time poor, very busy school leaders and teachers, and they really need something they can easily navigate through. So you want to make it as simple as possible. And if you're not sure, just ask your partner, ask your neighbour, ask a classmate, does this look easy to navigate? What does yours look like? Let's have an idea of, develop a sense of what's going to work for you. Right, in terms of government schools, I've got my CV or resume, I've got my referees. I've got a cover letter, which is typically one side of an A4 piece of paper, so it's quite short. And that's probably the biggest difference between other sectors like early childhood and independent or Catholic schools and what you're going to be asked to do for a government school. The letter is quite short. And what to write in the letter serves two purposes really. It shows you're a professional communicator, so it's laid out beautifully. It's got it's quite concise and easy to read. So they look at it and go, it's an introduction, it's a little hook to get them reading, and to show that you can write professionally. In terms of what you would write about in your cover letter, it's going to vary person to person, but I think I like to think about it as, if you think about this school, this job as a kind of bundle of skills and values and experiences and things that they're focusing on, and then you as a bundle of sort of skills and experiences and things that you're passionate about or want to do in teaching, there's going to be an overlap in the middle of that Venn diagram. That's what I really want to emphasize. What makes you stand out? Where's your passion? Why are you really drawn to this job? You absolutely write the letter for each job. I would absolutely write the letter for each job. I might not rewrite every key selection criterion, but I would write the letter for each school. And I just write, really reflecting on why I think I'm the best person for this job, why I really stand out, why it really appeals to me. But nice and short. So just in an A4 page, 3 or 4 paragraphs maximum. Really just to emphasize who you are, that you're really excited, enthusiastic, of course you are, and that you can't wait to be at that school, and this is where you think you fit there. It's really just a hook to get them in. The panel that's a starting point for them. It's a launching pad, if you like, but most of their assessment of your ability comes from the key selection criterion, according to the government school process. So, but a cover letter is a formality. It's an expectation, I guess, of the panel. Following that, you're going to write a response to each of the key selection criterion. There are 5. So this is the big bit of work. It sounds short up until now. There's 5 key selection criterion. I'd say as a rule of thumb, an A4 page front, maybe a little bit on the back, depending on the criterion, depending on the evidence that you're trying to provide. Everyone's going to be a little bit different, but I'd be aiming for roughly one side of an A4 page for each of the criteria. And there's 5 of them, and I'll come to them in a moment. What you write, how you write about it's up to you. In terms of style, we're not looking so much for your theoretical knowledge. We want to see the applied, how you've applied that. So, if you're going to, instead of talking about a pedagogical framework, for example, you talk about really how that looks for you in the classroom. And I think the best applications I've read are always painting a picture of what you're like as an actual teacher. So the person reading it, being a teacher who's used to being around people, is thinking about you and can kind of see what you might look like in the classroom. So provide, some detail around what it actually looks like on the job. Sometimes I get principals say to me, I read these applications and I just didn't even get a sense that that the applicant was very passionate about working with children or young people. Because sometimes I think it's because we've written a lot of our university work's quite academic style of writing, whereas our applications can be a little bit more personal, a little bit more reflective. We really want to show our passion, our enthusiasm, the fact that we like teaching, that we like working with young people, they're excited to be starting our careers. We want to try and give that feeling in what we're writing rather than something that's a bit more analytical. They're not looking for that in schools. Okay, one last thing. I'll jump into the key selection criteria and then I'll hand over to Jack. In terms of formatting, I sometimes get a question around this. Just save them as a PDF and upload them. That way your formatting doesn't get lost in the system, and then you just upload it up into your onto the Recruitment Online against the job that you're going to apply for. So in terms of the key selection criterion, this is them. So there's 5. Some schools will have a 6th, an optional 6th one. So a school could do a school-based criterion. It's a pain in the neck because that's another, maybe one side of an A4 sheet that I've got to write, but it's also a really great heads up that that's a priority for that school. I've heard some school principals say we always put a 6th one in because if we look at the application and they haven't even responded to the 6th one, we're not going to progress the application. We'll only read the ones where they've written that 6th one for our school, and that's their way of cutting it back. And that, it's a shame because they're probably missing out on potentially a great teacher, but they have to find a way to shorten it down. If you haven't taken the time to check the criterion on the job ad and then write to them, then the school's they feel like, well, we don't have time to read your application. So keep an eye out for an optional 6th one, but the first 5 are pretty standard. Some schools, I know, reword them slightly, but they must cover those areas. So you're not going to find anything vastly different. If you do, they're in breach probably of the HR requirement of department, and we quite regularly as a union will kind of follow that up with the school directly and just guide them back to what the process is. Technically, in the eyes of the Department of Education Training Victoria, you're a teacher employed by them, not by the principal or the school locally. You're employed centrally at Spring Street with the department. And so that's why there's a uniform process across the board, because a teacher job is the same across the board in their eyes. The principal is the employer's representative on site, so they have like a delegated authority, but you're actually employed by the department overall. So a principal can't just invent some new criteria that they want. They'll pretty much, and you'll see pretty consistently across the board, they're going to be looking at those 5 criteria. Now, what to write for them? They're long, and they're not even double or triple barrel. They're really complex criteria. What a school leader said to me a couple of years ago as a suggestion, I think it's a good tip to pass on to you today. He said that when you look at key selection criterion 1, it's all about what you teach, so the content that you teach. 2 is about how you teach, so your approach to teaching, to working with young people. 3 is really around how you know you've taught. It's all about assessment and reporting. Number 4 is how you get along with others. So that's with your students, that's with parents, that's with community members and other organisations, and definitely that's with your colleagues that you're going to be working very closely with in a school. And number 5 is what else you can bring. It's pretty broad, the 5th criterion, but it really is around looking back at your professional practice. It's a good opportunity, I find, to talk about other things you've done, extracurricular things and how they might apply to teaching. So volunteer work or camps or excursions that you've been able to be part of. That's a good one to kind of squeeze into number 5, where you've got something really unique you want to make sure the panel don't miss. And then, as I said, a lot of schools don't bother with it, but some will have a 6th criterion, and they're very varied. So it could be, they're a very strong sporting culture at the school. There might be a comment around that. If they've got a really big STEM program that they're trying to get off the ground, there might be a criteria around that, might be a particular value or something that they're really focusing on. Varies school to school, but keep an eye out for those. So that's the 5 key selection criterion across the board. In terms of the application, I'm writing roughly an A4 page front of each of them, maybe a little bit longer depending on my examples or evidence that I'm providing. I am going to so I just put the criterion at the top, and then I'm going to, either in prose, or some people use dot points. Some people might have, like a bit of information and some dot points of evidence. The best examples, I think, are the ones that really show what you like in the classroom. So really connecting to your practice and what you've done. That would be my advice. So I'd be looking at probably at least 2 good examples for each of the criterion to kind of illustrate it. You don't need to explain to them what curriculum's about. You need to explain to them, this is how I use curriculum. You don't have to explain to them, how important it is to get along with people. You say, on my placement, this is how I got along and worked in a team environment, for example. Really an applied, your applied experience is really what's going to stand out for the panel, rather than just saying, look, I understand that's important. To get you started, as a suggestion from here, I've got a bit of a planning grid. When I graduated, I actually had a Word document with the criterion at the time on the top of each page, and then I basically just kept dot points. So, but if you start with this from today, then you can have a look and see, you've got the 5 criterion on one side, and you've got 3 examples. You can then go and at least you've got some evidence for each of them. You might get to, number 3, which is around assessment, and go, actually, I don't have any evidence here. I need to go and dig a bit deeper. Or I need to maybe talk to my old mentor teacher. Or I need to go and have a look for an assignment, because you can use evidence from your practice out there teaching, but you can also use evidence of maybe an assignment that you planned to do some assessment in. You didn't get to do the actual assessment, which is okay. Schools will understand that that's your situation, but there might be some great evidence of your ability to plan for assessment, effective assessment, in that unit that you designed for uni. So you can include that as a piece of evidence against criterion 3. If you start filling that grid and you go, I don't have any examples, now's a great time to realise that and go out and get some. So it could be doing a bit of professional reading in that area. It might be reconnecting with your former mentor teacher to have a bit of a chat with them about that criterion in particular and get them to kind of, how would you talk about it? Talking to each other, your classmates and future colleagues are a great source of support. They're on the same level as you and everyone's a little bit unsure about what they need to include. But, just sharing your ideas and brainstorming together is a really effective way of getting started. So as my starting point, I'd say start with that kind of planning grid. For early childhood, we've sometimes said look at the professional standards for teachers. So the professional standards for teachers apply across the board and in early childhood. They're similar. They cover the same sort of stuff because it's the same work as a teacher, essentially. But you'll have slightly different examples, obviously, in early childhood. We talk about that environment in a different way. But starting with a planning grid like that with the professional standards or the key selection criterion for government schools is a great way to start. And honestly, with that evidence ready to go, you could apply for an early childhood job. I could apply for a Catholic school job. I could apply for an independent school job because they're going to be looking for similar things in terms of my ability. They might order it differently or have a different priority at that school, but they're going to be looking for the same kinds of evidence. So I want to make sure I've got a good pile of evidence ready at my fingertips to start putting into my application. Now, Jack, before I jump into a little bit more in terms of background, if you want to talk a little bit about what a written application could look like outside of my sector, that would be awesome.
Yeah, am I able to share the screen for a moment and just go into the Catholic website? No. That's all right. I will just talk through some parts of it. I'm not hosted at the moment. We didn't quite get to that. But that's all right. I'll just talk through it. So if you do go onto the CECV Catholic website that I put in before, you'll see there's a few classroom teacher roles towards the top that I've just been scrolling through. And it is, very varied even within that Catholic sector, as I had said. So I've got one up here that's a graduate position at St Margaret Mary's School. It just has a role description with dot points underneath it, and then it just says, please note, send a cover letter and a copy of your CV as part of your application. So the role description though, it's not asking you specifically to fill out the key selection criteria, but I would make sure that I had either put it in my cover letter or just done up a separate document, labelled addressing the role description and maybe just making sure that I've covered all those things in there. There is a point that most of them will have in the Catholic, which is accreditation to teach religious education in a Catholic school or willingness to seek accreditation. Don't worry too much about that because if you get the job, they will put you through that accreditation. So it's not something that you have to be like, oh, I don't have that, so I can't apply for this. There are things, so most of them say things like a strong commitment to Catholic education and to Catholic identity. They're not saying that you have to be Catholic to work in that school, and many teachers aren't that work in them. It's just saying that you, I guess, have to sort of agree to those values and you will be expected if you're doing primary to teach religion as part of the curriculum. It is worth flagging that there is a exemption in the Discrimination Act that in religious schools they can discriminate if it aligns with their religion. So it means that you can get not hired or fired for going against the religious ethos of that school. So say if you worked at a Christian school and you were talking pro-abortion rights, you could legally get fired for that. So it's just worth noting that exists. It doesn't, in the Catholic sector, it doesn't really happen very much. But the more sort of Christian brethren, that's where it will be sort of expected that you do live to those values. But yeah. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Jack. So, and similar again with early childhood, you might find, because any school's going to have values, government schools have values. It's just that you can't be discriminated against in a government school setting. It's unlawful, but we still have values. There's departmental values that we adhere to. They're pretty broad. That's in key selection criterion 5. So the evidence that you've got there, it might be that they translate a little bit into some of the other sectors. And in an early childhood setting, they might have sort of values on there, but they're likely to have on their website or their enrolment material information about the centre and the service. And so have a read through that, because that'll give you a sense of what's their priorities, what are they about, what's their approach to learning, how do they view young people, and then you're using that as a guide to what kind of examples you want to pull out from your planning to put into that application. Alrighty, so I'm going to talk a little bit now about that research element. So government schools, and it's a little bit different at the moment because our whole world's a little bit different at the moment, but government schools will often offer a tour. So if ideally you'd say if there's and if we get to the stage where we can get access to schools, again, this term, if they've got a job advertised, you can contact the school and ask them if they do have a tour or a way that you can come in and have a look around. They're really useful. Often if it's a larger school, they'll say, yes, we've got a tour, it's planned for this date and time, and they'll have a whole group of potential applicants come through and have a look. Or some schools will say, yeah, we do, but it's grade 6 students will do it for you at this time. So it sort of depends on the school. Some at the moment might say, look, it's just not safe for us to have extra adults on site at this stage. So, you know, if you could just have a look at our website, or we could send you through some information. Or some schools will probably, no doubt, take a laptop around and give you a virtual tour of the school. It really depends on the school. But a school tour for me, having been in a school environment, you can really get a sense of what that school's about, and also if it's the kind of place you might want to work. Websites are really valuable, but sometimes get out of date. So just be mindful around date sensitivities on, you know, they might have been written a couple of years ago and maybe things have changed a little bit. Newsletters, or some schools have apps where you can get updates from the school, or a Facebook page, for example, social media account. Those avenues are usually a lot more up to date. So if you can get your hands on some recent newsletters, either through the school website, by contacting the school direct, by jumping in one of your university forums and just saying, hey, has anyone been to this school? Does anyone know about this school? You know, maybe someone's got a child that attends at that school and could get their hands on a newsletter for you. The My School website exists. So it's a website that has a whole bunch of information about all school settings right across the board. My School website will give you a sense of the enrolment numbers, so the size of the school, how many staff work there is recorded in there, a link to the school websites on there, a school profile, which you'll also get from your Recruitment Online job ad, but for other schools you'll see that too. And also a bit of a breakdown around socioeconomic status, and also like numbers of Indigenous students enrolled at the school is captured through My School. So you can get on there, the My School website, and the idea is it's built for parents to have a bit of a look and think about schools, but you can also get a bit of a heads up around what schools might look like, having a look on the My School website as well. Victorian government schools have, and every school will have planning processes, but we're required to have what we call a strategic and then an annual implementation plan. So the strategic plan is a big overarching multi-year plan. The annual implementation plan is the 12-month cycle of how we're going to implement those things in the school. They are required to be made available to the community. So they're typically uploaded onto a school website. They're quite wordy and they're really written for a different purpose than helping job seekers, but they are actually a really good source to see what that school's focusing on. So they might be really working on, in primary setting, might be like, you know, getting grade 3 literacy results up to a certain level. So they're really working hard on improving and improving teacher practice in that particular space. So having a look on there, you'll just see there's a whole range of things around the academic, but also kind of cultural and social wellbeing targets that a school's working towards. So I encourage you, if you can get your hands on those. If they're not on the website, you can contact the school and say, I'm a local community member, or I'm looking at applying for a job at the school. Is it possible to get a copy of those documents, please? They're a publicly available thing. School tours I mentioned twice because I like them. Your networks is another one. I've kind of alluded to this, but you know, you'll have people in your class who may have had a placement at that school or centre. You will have people that you like, for example, we've got a Facebook group at the AU called the Early Childhood Teachers Victoria page. It's huge. It's a massive, really busy Facebook group. So if you are in looking at working in early childhood sector, get onto that. So Early Childhood Teachers Victoria page. People often post in there, does anyone know anything about this centre? Or I'm really curious about this employer. What is it like to work there? And people share very openly about what's happening for them at work. So it's a good way to get a bit of a heads up. The AU, we've got a Facebook group for our students and graduate members at the AEU. That's the New Educator Network page. Again, people post questions in there around, you know, I'm looking at this, or this school has this as a priority, how would I write about it? Like just reaching out and like broadening those connections out through the people that you've come across, that you're studying with, that you're going to be working with in the future. They're going to help to give you, use your networks to find out about jobs, use your networks to find out about approaches to writing applications, or particular employers as well. That, you know, anything you've got at your disposal, you want to kind of connect in with those people and get that information. And for some of you, it might be after today reconnecting with, you know, a former mentor teacher at a school you had a couple of, you know, maybe in your first year, you went out and did observations and you thought, this is a great school. I really like, you know, I'd like to, you know, maybe get a job here if something comes up. I'm going to reach out to a contact that I've got there and reconnect. If there's someone that can be a referee, for example, or it could just be just to see what's happening there and say, look, I'm about to graduate and I'm really keen on your workplace. You know, is there any jobs coming up, or is there anything, you know, that you should be, that I should be aware of? You know, I'm interested in this is where I want to work. That's really, yeah, use your networks. Rightio. So when you think about application, I think this probably applies across the board, but Jack might have some other bits to add. You're writing for a particular audience. So think about the person you're writing. This is a panel. They're time poor school leaders and teachers. They don't have a lot of time to kind of go into the nuance of every little detail. So you want to make your application as clearly worded and clearly laid out as possible. And as I said, there's not one way to do that. So there's not like a secret template for a clearly worded resume, for example. It's up to you with the information you've got to figure out the best way to lay it out. That's a unique challenge for each of us. So, but you are writing for those people that don't have a lot of time to read your applications. As a teacher, you don't get a CRT come in, a casual teacher come and take a class for a week so you can kind of ponder each application. You typically do it in your own time over the weekend, in between classes when you've got time. So you need to make your application as easy to access as possible. I have a principal from Warrnambool, primary principal, the other a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about it, and she said that she has, she calls it keyword bingo when she's recruiting, because she's basically scanning through the document looking for keywords. And those keywords are keywords from the criterion, but also keywords about their school, the school's values, the school's approach to teaching and learning, because she needs to, you know, that's time she's got. She's got a highlighter and she's looking for those keywords. And the more highlighters she can get down, the more likely that person's going to get to the interview stage. She's not reading in any great detail going, oh, tell me about, you know, what led you to believe this. You know, she's just like, you know, are they on the right track? Have they done a bit of research? Write with a personal voice. Again, like I said earlier, writing from you as a teacher, we want to feel your enthusiasm. Graduate teachers sometimes say to me, like, I don't, you know, why would they hire me? Because I'm so new, I don't know anything. There's a range of reasons why schools employ graduates, but probably the main reason, and I had a couple of principals at a conference last week say to us that really in their view, your enthusiasm, your access, your ability to work with technology, particularly this year, but your ability to work with technology is really up. Even if you don't feel like you're up to scratch with technology, you are, compared to quite a number of colleagues in teaching. Also, your curriculum knowledge is really up to date, and having a new energy and a new voice and someone who's learning and eager in a school gives opportunities for more experienced teachers in terms of mentoring and supporting you, and helps with their development and improving the culture of the school. So there's a whole range of strengths that you're bringing, let alone the fact that you're probably amazing practitioners, that you've got lots of experience from your studies at Melbourne, and also the other work and life experience that you're bringing to the table. So you're absolutely desirable in terms of schools. They are keen to hire graduate teachers. But just try and put that across, show your enthusiasm, show you're up to date, you're ready to go, and you're really excited to get out there and be a teacher. You're writing for a particular school. So that means, as I said earlier, write the cover letter for that school specifically. Think about with your key selection criteria, you'll probably develop one set of the 5, and then you might tweak it slightly. I think that's a good way to keep the person interested and to show that you've written specifically for that school. So in the key selection criteria, and be prepared to personalise them a little bit. Maybe insert the school values at the appropriate spot, or maybe if that school, you know, has a really, you know, they've got a robotics program and you've got, you know, some knowledge or experience in that space, it might be that you change over one of your examples to really target that school a little bit more specifically. So be just little tweaks and subtle, you know, dropping in the school name and school values as a way to help to personalise the criterion and help to make your application stand out. Provide evidence. So don't just say, you know, working with parents is important. Show how that's important. Show how you plan to work with parents, or how you'd like to work with parents, the role that parents play. It's really, it's easy to say, you know, I understand curriculum this way, teaching's about this, it's about every learner, and, you know, there's lots of sort of motherhood statements we can make, but they really want the evidence. So provide little scenarios, and I'll talk about how to unpack that in the next slide, but provide little scenarios, little vignettes into you as a teacher, you as a professional, so that they can really see you doing it. And that's how you prove, I know curriculum, I'll show you, this is the way that I planned for this particular unit, and these are the elements that I drew into that. That shows that you understand the criterion, but also shows you in action, which is really what they want to know about. And also the other thing is around, so in terms of structuring response, the STAR, there's also one called SAO, Situation Action Outcome, which was in our conference we did last week. Situation Action Outcome is a little bit shorter and I think really good for preparing for interviews as well. And STAR is Situation Target Action Result. So if you've gone away, you're right, okay, I'll do what Adam says, I'll just do some dot points of examples, and then you're sitting down, after your last assignment, you're like, right, I'm going to write this job application on a Sunday evening. This is somewhere to start. So you could start with a sentence for those examples, a sentence describing the situation, the target, what did you want to achieve, what was the purpose of what you were there for, what actions did you take or would you take, what was the result, did it work, didn't it work. A sentence for each creates a paragraph in the key selection criterion, and it paints a really comprehensive picture of that example. It's also a great way to think about structuring when you're practicing for your interviews, structure response on something like situation, target, action, result, or situation, action, outcome, as SAO. So this is the department, it's not like every principal gets trained in it, but this is, I know, for the departmental employees, this is what they have to get to know very well to get a job in the department, and consequently it's what the department recommend for teachers as a starting point. So I might say, for example, it might be the first key selection criteria talking about curriculum, and I might say, so on my final placement at X school, I was teaching a group of grade 4 students for a targeted literacy improvement program. What was the target? What I hope to achieve? There are a range of behavioural issues and engagement issues with the students, including ... My actions, so I planned in this way, I drew in the curriculum, my understanding of the student, their preferred way of learning this way, and I ensured, by providing a rubric of rich activities that, blah, the result was super engaged students, I'm the best teacher in the world, please give me the job. Or sometimes the result was I had to go, it didn't actually get there, but what I would do differently in the future is this. And that's really valuable. That's your entire career in teaching is going to be like that. I talk to graduates who say, oh, I did the lesson and it bombed. I talk to like 20-year experienced teachers who say the same thing. It happens throughout our work, in part because it's human work. It's quite complex what we do as teachers. And also because, if you're a great teacher, you're trialing new things and incorporating new aspects into your practice and trying to really tailor your approach to your different students. So if it didn't work, that's okay, but you're going to make that into a strength by saying, look, I didn't quite get the outcome in this situation. But in future, what I'll do is make these modifications to make sure that the students were fully engaged, or to make sure that they didn't miss this part of the curriculum, whatever it is. So that's the situation, target, action, result. The other thing I'll point out at this stage, again, you can use hypotheticals. So it might be, look, I did an assignment. The situation was I needed to design, based on this set of student data, or for this particular unit, I designed a subject on teaching science and space. This was the target, this was the actions that I would have done, and this is the result that I would have hoped to have achieved if I'd been able to teach the lesson. So you can use some of your simulated work that you've done at university for evidence as well. I try and preference probably my classroom teaching experience first, where you can, your placement experience, but obviously, none of us graduating from university have a really rich library of experiences that we can share. We've got some great opportunities through our studies, but we can also use some hypothetical scenarios as well. Jack, I'm going to pause for breath in case there's any questions I'm missing, and then I'll move into the next section.
There's been a few questions, but I think we've been able to mostly cover them in the chat space. A lot around the references or the referees that you might use. I think it's just important, like I said earlier on, that I think it's good to use 2 from your teaching practice if you can, and make them as, like someone asked about using someone from teaching experience outside of Australia. I think you just need to think about like the job that you're applying for. So if you're applying for a job at an international school, for example, then that might actually be relevant. But if you're applying for a job in a Victorian or Australian school, then your mentors and people who observed your teaching in that same context will be a lot more relevant and probably better for that. And then the one from outside work experience, I think, is always good. So usually that's if you've had like a casual job or a previous career or something like that, that just shows things that you do and how you are as maybe an employee a little bit. But if you haven't worked before, then I think that third one is still good to maybe have someone, it might be someone from uni, although they're not necessarily the best people to use. If you've ever done babysitting or something like that for someone, that can be a good one as well. I did just share, there was a few questions around the values. So I shared, like most schools do have their values explicitly stated because they use it in a primary setting, especially. They normally use it a lot with behaviour management and rewards and those sorts of things. So I've shared the Thornbury Primary School one because that was where I did some teaching. And I've also included a cover letter example that I used for that school. It's a few years old, but I guess the point is that that cover letter really highlights the values and how they relate to my own personal values. So my advice around these things is to try and find 3 things that you really, that sort of either that link with your values, but also that you're passionate about, and try and work that into your cover letter, particularly, and especially, yeah, you can align that with their school values often as well. And if they don't have the values stated, you can usually sort of read between the lines of what kind of programs they have. So at Thornbury Primary, for example, they have Woiwurrung as a language program. So it's very clear that they value Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students and working in that space, as well as they have like a multi-age program there. So it's a very inclusive school. So you can see that that's really important. They might have a kitchen garden program or something like that. So they obviously value things like the environment and sustainability. I think that's all I really have to add at this point.
Yep. All right. Timothy's got a question there around parent engagement and private, like the, if you've got an example where you've been doing tutoring, for example, that could be an example that you'd use. Yeah, 2 referees would be a minimum, but I would say, think about it in this way. Think about who can talk about you as a teacher first and the best example you've got for that. And if I taught overseas as well, I'd probably go for, if I could, I'd have someone from professional placements in Australia, but then I might include them as a referee just to point out there's somebody in another country from where I taught, because that's an edge that I might have over another applicant. So I might still include it. It's unlikely they'll be contacted by the school, but it's nice to have that extra referee to demonstrate my ability. And same with examples of private tutoring. So in my written application, I want to try and prioritise professional placement, me being a teacher or me attempting to be a teacher on placement. And then if I don't have another example and I've got a really strong example from private tutoring or my other work, then I'd probably include that as a second preference. And it's going to be different for everyone. Not everyone is going to have fantastic examples for every criterion across the board. We're all quite unique in that way. And schools are really looking for your potential in there. So anything that's going to illustrate your potential, we haven't actually been able to show it, is really going to give you an edge. It's going to make you stand out. Now, I've put up some examples of the layout. It's totally up to you how you want to lay out your written application. People often say, so you can see someone's used dot points, someone's using, the other one at the back is actually using quotes. So they started off the criterion that was the old criterion 4, which is still the new criterion 4 is around communication still. They've actually included some quotes from written feedback they got from a placement teacher. You can include quotes if you like. Please no academic quotes because we're not writing an essay. But a quote around, someone who's seen you in action, that's really cool because that was probably written in a card or on a university feedback form or, lodged online. But being able to bring that across and add that extra voice to your application can be really powerful. So if you've got those, think about including them. You don't have to, schools aren't going to expect it, but if you've got that as evidence of your abilities, why not sneak in another voice to talk about you. So and as you can see, you can use dot points. Some people just write a prose style, like just paragraph, a short opening paragraph to say, communication is really important. This is my style as a communicator, and then the evidence, the star or SAO, unpacking some examples of you communicating in action. And you won't have examples necessarily for every, for teachers, students, and you just pick what's your best example of communication that you've had. Often on placement, you don't get much chance to engage with parents as directly as your supervising teacher might. So you might not have examples there, but you might have great examples of how you've engaged and communicate with students during class, when you're in a session, or with your colleagues in a meeting or, planning environment. So totally up to you. What I like about both of these examples is that they are nicely written out. So some of them use, there's dot points, it's a bit of bold in some of them, there's indenting used. Don't do all the formatting possible, but just think about, you know, if you're looking at it, it just looks like big blocky text, that's not very accessible. Think about how you need to lay it out. There's no minimum border width or font size or font color text, anything. Just make it as simple to navigate as possible as a professional document. Rightio. So you upload your application into Recruitment Online. People often say, how long does it take? Well, I would say typically within 2 weeks, you're going to know if you're through to an interview stage, but it's dependent on a few things. So I had circumstances where someone else on the panel was sick. So we had to wait until that person, you know, they were a couple of days behind in terms of reading. We had to push the interviews out. Sometimes schools advertise, you know, things happen. People say, I'm going to take a year of unpaid leave next year. And then the school advertises and then they find out that they're pregnant and they're going to stay, or that they've got an elderly relative they want to stick around for. So they don't go travelling for a year, or COVID comes and then they say, actually, can I renege that? Can I stay? And then the school might have advertised and take the advertisement down. How long after you've put in a written application? Usually around 2 weeks, I would say, sometimes a little bit longer. Most of the times with a written application, once you put the written application into the Recruitment Online, you will get a email saying it's submitted. You'll likely be contacted directly to book you in for an interview, usually via a phone call, if you've got to the interview stage. If you haven't, you won't have heard anything. And then in 2 weeks' time, you might get an automated email from Recruitment Online that says, unfortunately, you weren't successful. So that might be the only thing you kind of hear in terms of your written application, that you didn't get through the next stage. But if you are through the next stage, you'll get called to booked in for an interview. It'll freak you out, no doubt. It's pretty exciting and scary to be selected for an interview. So what do? I go back to my written application, because you could get any number of questions. And actually, for everyone who registered for today, I'll send out a PDF of the slides, but I'll also send out a PDF of some interview questions I've got, just general ones that you can use as to practice and sort of get your head around it. But you'd start with your written application, because the 5 key selection criteria cover all of the work that a teacher does. Basically, there's no thing you're going to be required to do that doesn't fit under those 5 criterion. And so the questions are going to relate to that. They might not be exactly worded like the criterion, they might be more applied, like, can you give an example of this time, or tell us a bit about your approach to blah. So they can be quite varied. The panel get to choose what questions they're going to provide you, so there's no master list or kind of sneaky way around it. It's really, going back to your written application is a really good start, because in your interview, you can use the same evidence again in the interview. They won't have memorised exactly what you said as your example. And if that's the best example, you might just talk to that in the interview. That is totally fine. And also, you've got a lot of evidence there in terms of what you've written. Revisit the research that you've done into the school's priority and programs. That might bring up some questions for you. People often say to me, what questions do I ask a panel? I would say don't ask the question unless you've got one. Like, don't make up a question, because they're teachers, they'll figure it out, you're wasting their time. So don't ask a question unless you've got one, but it might be that you're curious about what kind of mentoring support they've got in the school, because, you know, as a graduate teacher, you're going to be keen to, you know, build your practice and improve your teaching skills. What approach do they have to mentoring support? It might be that you've seen they've got a, you know, cool Indigenous language program at the school, like Jackie mentioned, and you just think, oh, you know, I want to know about that while I'm here. I'm just curious. Do I get to teach that as part of my classroom at Thornbury, or is that a specialist teacher, for example? I think, you know, showing those sort of questions in interview show that you've done a bit of research into the school. If you've got no questions, it's okay to not ask a question. Absolutely okay to not ask a question. But revisit your research into the school. Allocate some time. Our colleague, if you got to come to our conference last week, David Tyson is a very, very experienced school principal and now trains school leaders, but he came along and did a session on interviews, and he says you've got to train. He was like, you've got to train like an athlete. Set some time aside, because practice is going to be the best way to manage your nerves and to feel comfortable going into the interview process. So if you're confident in being able to talk about yourself and your experiences, then that's going to put you in a much more confident space when you're in the room. You know, you'll be able to manage your nerves a little bit better. So allow time to practice. It might be David's approach was like, we're going to do a question every night for 2 weeks with his daughter when she was applying for a kindergarten role. Or it could be, you know, setting aside some blocks of time in around your family schedule or your life schedule where you can get in and do some practice, but absolutely practice. Practice reading through to yourself, but also practice with a classmate, a family member, a teacher colleague, anyone you can convince to or bribe to come and listen to you. Practice with that person too, so you can get their insight into how it seems on the receiving end. Don't assume that they've read or remember your written application. You can use the evidence absolutely again in the interview. but practice is key. So if you want to be good at it, we don't often get to do interviews, which is for me a fortunate thing because I hate them. They make me very nervous. They make me talk quicker than I am today. Can you imagine? But they do make me feel very nervous. So I would prefer, I almost prefer to be in a job I hate than have to do a job interview. But that's only because I don't do interviews very often. I do this work. I'm happy to get up and speak to a group or Zoom in to have a chat with people. But going and interviewing with the panel is a scary prospect. But if I did it every day, like I do this work, I'd probably feel quite water off a duck's back about it. So the more practice you can do, the more time you can give yourself, the more comfortable you're going to feel, and the more likely. And really, with an interview, you're just aiming to give a truest sense of yourself. You don't want your nerves to get in the way. You're just going to give, your honest, upfront answers and evidence of what you've been up to and what your potential is, and try to give them a sense of your personality, because it's as much as about there's like an unanswered. There's questions in the back of the panel's mind a little bit about how do you fit into our school community? Like, would I have that person in my grade 4 team, or would that person be great as part of the English faculty, or what feeling do we get from having that person around? That's why they're a video screen to screen or face-to-face process, because we won't actually meet the person. We've seen on paper you can do it. They're sure you can do it if they're giving you an interview. They're not going to waste their time on someone they're not interested in. They interview you because they actually genuinely want to get to know you a bit better. Types of questions, tons. As I said, I'll send you a list of some of the common questions we get, totally adaptable for kind of any sector. I would think about questions based off the criterion. So can you talk about a time where you planned for this, or could you tell us about your approach to assessment or behaviour management? There's some of these, you'll get an open question like, why have you, this is a good one to prepare for. Why have you applied for this position? What strengths do you bring to our school? If you can have that ready to go, it's likely you're going to get a question like that to open. Where you can use that kind of evidence. Or at the end, when they say, is there anything else you'd like to add? You can say, I've applied for this position because Thornbury Primary School sounds really awesome to me. And the strengths I would bring is, I think it's awesome and I want to, be a great graduate teacher at Thornbury, whatever it is. So if you've got something like that, practice and rehearse and you're comfortable saying it, it's very likely you'll get a question like that at the start. Tell us about you question, or at the end, you can always weave it in as a closing statement. Some direct things. So how would you plan for a numeracy unit, differentiating, catering to the needs of all students? So that would be, I'd be thinking about, take a breath. What have I done in terms of my numeracy teaching? This is a primary example. This particular one. So what have I done? What evidence do I have? Or what evidence do I have that's sort of similar? So I might not have actually, I can't say here's a numeracy unit I planned end to end, but I could say this is my approach to planning. This is the kinds of things that I take into account. These are the ways that I check out. This is the way I put in assessment and so on. This is how I cater to needs of all students. So I can draw on examples from other areas of my practice and talk about how I'd apply them in that example. Absolutely. And a hypothetical is not uncommon as well. So you can see it there, student in grade 9 class, questions around student behaviour, how would you approach student behaviour? Always in your mind, it's always to review, what, depending on what the school's approach is, but this is the way I view student behavioural issues, and this is the way that I work to manage them. That's a common area for graduate teachers, quite challenging area for all teachers, but for graduate teachers can be quite an opportunity for learning, I suppose. So there's broadly, I guess, the types of questions. I'll send you through a list so you can have some to practice with. If you have come across an interview question recently, or you know of one, or you reckon you can predict one, feel free to share it in the chat box, because a big long list of your suggestions is a great place to start as well. It could be anything, but it's going to really link to the job of a teacher. So in terms of government schools, and then I'll hand over to Jack for just some interview comments as well. What to expect on the day, usually have at least 3 in there. They'll have a principal or a principal's nominee, depending on the size of the school. But at least 3 staff to interview, and they'll have about 5 to 8 questions. I'd be aiming for maybe 3 to 5 minutes per response, generally. And when you're practicing, you can kind of have a look at that. If you finish it really quickly, maybe you need to add a little bit more detail about the situation or the outcome. Or if it's really long, maybe you need to kind of think about, how do I get to the point on this one? They may give you some questions or a question in advance. We had the principal at Preston High say the other day, he asked, it's actually a school I applied for, did a similar thing back when I was a graduate, but he said, can you bring an object that you can talk to about that reflects you as a teacher? which is great if you get a question in advance. It feels a bit daunting, the idea of bringing an object, but it gives you, you've got a lot of time to think about it and practice talking about it so you can feel comfortable with that first question. So sometimes I'll give you a question in advance, so they'll book you for the interview and say the first question will be, or we're going to ask you to bring. So you've got some preparation time. Sometimes you'll arrive and they'll say, look, we've got, you know, your interview's at 3:30, so at 3:20, if you can arrive by 3:20, they'll put you in a little room, usually with some minties or something. Don't eat them, they're probably the students have probably been at them. You know, there'll be some lollies, there's some water, there'll be some writing paper and an opportunity for you to look at some of the questions before you go into interview. So that's quite common practice. I'll give you 10 minutes before. Sometimes they don't. I'll say it's at 3:30, just arrive, you know, shortly before, and you walk in at 3:30 and you're in your interview. So it varies school to school in terms of the delivery. Across the board, though, they want you to do well. They're teachers. They're the people who give everyone a gold star for participation. We want you to do well. They're not going to waste their time getting you in so they can trick you up in an interview. It'll feel uncomfortable sometimes, but they really just ask you questions to get to know you and to, you know, they're trying to make you feel relaxed. So don't feel like they're out to get you or trick you in some way. They really just remind yourself they're teachers. They're trying to be nice to me. They're trying to help you. You know, it's an awkward, uncomfortable type situation, but it's really about getting the best out of you. No panel is going to waste their time, you know, grilling someone and, you know, trying to trip you up, because it's a waste of their time to be there. They're giving their time to interview you. They want you to perform the best you can. You may be asked for some more information on a question. That's not to criticise you. It's just to say, can you tell us a bit more about that? Or it's a heads up. So you've answered the question, but maybe you missed a little bit. So they want a bit more information so that they can, you know, fairly assess you. So yep, that's not a problem if they ask for a little bit more information. And you're very likely to be asked if you've got questions. So if you've got a question, a genuine question about the school or the program, do bring it. If you don't feel like you have to. Don't feel like you have to at all. At that stage, you might say, no, I don't, but I'd just like to say, this is why I think, you know, I'd like to work at this school, and thank you very much for your time today, as a way to close the interview. I like questions where I've got them. I think it changes the dynamic a little bit. It shifts it because it feels very one-sided where I've got to answer everything. But if I'm asking them a question, it kind of becomes more of a conversation, because you might genuinely have some questions like, I've replied, you're interviewing me, but I don't know for sure if this is quite the right school for me. So I'm going to bring some things to ask you. And that shifts the dynamic a little bit. So, Jack, did you want to add something on interviews?
No, not really. I think you've covered it pretty well. We have a question that goes back a little bit around key selection criteria and whether it's usually different if you're applying for like special education schools.
So government setting, it won't. It's very, very different working as a special ed teacher as opposed to like a mainstream school. But the criteria will be the same because it's the same employer. The examples you use for a special education setting might be a little bit different because you'll be a bit more aware of the type of students and the type of work and the type of learning that happens in those settings. So it'll be the same, expect the same criteria. But absolutely, for government schools, it's going to be the same across the board, would be the expectation.
And yeah, so because you said in state special development schools, so it would be the same as Adam has said. But if it is a non-government, then they can write whatever, they can ask you whatever key selection criteria they like.
Absolutely. Or they might just say, write a covering letter, and then you read the website and figure out what's a priority for this place and what evidence can I show that I fit in.
Yeah. What do you think about bringing like a portfolio or bringing hard copies of your key selection criteria and those sorts of things? Oh, you're going on to that.
Hey, good question. It's great minds think alike. So look, in terms of portfolios and notes, you could take both into an interview. And depending, I'm not sure actually at the moment if you will do a portfolio. It might even vary program to program, but in some universities, they'll, as part of an assessment or part of your studies, they'll say you need to prepare a portfolio and you must have this portfolio so you can apply for jobs. Absolutely, if you've got it as an assessment item, do it. Do an amazing job, get great results. But in terms of your interview, the panel's not going to expect a portfolio either way. A portfolio is basically a selection of work samples, photographs, planning documents, things that document what you're about as an educator. I think if you're writing an application, they can be really valuable to have some photos from when you were teaching that unit, or a copy of the unit plan on hand to look at and think about as a good memory prompt for you. Some people take them into interviews. Either way, if you are going to take in a portfolio, you need to practice with it. Some principals don't like them. They won't not hire you if you've got one. But the reason they don't like them typically is because they're used pretty poorly, and it's usually because nobody practiced with them. I've seen, they'll get through the whole interview and then primary teacher getting out the portfolio like a big book and reading it to us sort of at the end, which is not in context of any of the questions and kind of a bit of a waste of time. Or where you're going to answer the question, but you want to use your portfolio, and then you use an example that's not a very good example just so you can use your portfolio. Really focus on like, what are they asking for here? What's the best way I can talk about that from my experience? If a portfolio could help with that, if you've practiced with it, great. For me, I get distracted because I'm very nervous in interviews, as I've said, and I'll, if I've got notes or a portfolio there, I'm going to be touching them or getting them or putting them up in front of my face to hide, So I would, you could take in a copy of your application with you, but put it aside. They've read it, they've seen it. As a memory jog for you, it could be handy. But I would say, unless you practice with it and you're comfortable with them, then you don't have to do your interview with portfolios or notes. And the panel's not going to expect that you'll have either. They're not going to say, well, we only hire teachers with portfolios at this school. It's not like that. They're really looking for your capacity as a teacher rather than as a portfolio maker. Some people take a digital portfolio. That's fine if you've got a digital record of what you've been up to. Again, great memory jog. Sometimes I don't expect they've got charges or they can get you Wi-Fi access at the start of the interview. That's chewing into valuable discussion time. So if you're going to bring something, you make sure you've got your own connectivity and you're charged. And then again, I'd be using it where it's relevant, but it demonstrates you can use technology, but also can be quite distracting for a panel. So really, if it's got some great evidence and it's relevant to the question, then a portfolio could be useful. If you haven't practiced with it, don't worry about it. Just be ready to talk about what you like and what your experiences as a teacher. Before the day, think about what to wear, particularly if you're like Jackie and I, and you wear tracksuit pants pretty much every day at the moment. If you go to a face-to-face interview this term, you're probably, sorry, Jack, I know you're probably not. You're probably corporate off screen. But I know I'm wearing shorts today because it's comfortable and I'm at home. If you think about what to wear, think about the workplace that you're going into and dress appropriately. So that's to say, if you're applying like a primary school where I taught, everyone pretty much wore polo shirts, like kind of school polo shirts, and was a little bit more relaxed in their dress. If I turn up in a three-piece suit, that would look a little bit out of place. So I might not dress in a polo shirt, but I might have an open collared shirt like I've got today. Or I might, if a school in some secondary colleges, it's not uncommon for the male teachers to wear a jacket, like a suit jacket, then I might dress that way. So I look a little bit like that school. If I overdress or kind of show up underdressed, they might think that I'm not taking the job very seriously or that I'm not a very good cultural fit. So having it ready to go as well just means you're not getting up on the day and freaking out with ironing and that kind of thing. So, have an outfit in mind that you're going to put on the day so you can see yourself in that outfit. You can even practice with it on if you like to help to manage the nerves. Time, transport and parking options. So if you've been scheduled for an interview towards the end of a school day, it is crazy trying to get a car park and trying to get access to a school, and you don't want to upset any of the parents before you started working at that school, trust me. So have a think about that school community, look around. I know some graduates who will go maybe the day before or the week before and just go for a drive to that school and see where to park and where's the entrance to the office. Not always some of our new school buildings, it's not very clear where you go in. So maybe just getting familiar with the area could be, or where you're going to park, or if you're going to go by train, for example, get a lift, have those things ready to go so you're not freaking out on the morning of when you realise it's a traffic jam until 9:30 when the parents finally disappear, and then by which time you've had to run sweaty from 3 suburbs away. And plan a greeting. So be prepared to just, when you come in, you'll introduce yourself to the panel. You can offer to shake hands with each of them. Typically they'll get up and offer to shake your hand. I've found graduates sometimes, handshake is not a very common protocol anymore. In fact, we don't do it that much. Maybe award ceremonies in teaching, but it's not a very common thing generally in schools. But often when you meet a panel, they'll reach out to shake your hand. So don't offer them a dead fish and don't do the gorilla grip and hurt them. And if you're not sure, practice on your dog or practice on your neighbour or someone at home around handshaking and eye contact too. So have a go at looking at each, introduce yourself to your housemate and look at them and shake their hand and think about, what's a comfortable level of eye contact to show that you're genuinely kind of meeting that person. And I would probably, if I can, retain the names. I'd sit down and write them down straight away just so I remember who's who. Some panels will have foreseen that, particularly in primary, and they'll get little name signs or something so you're not, going to get confused about who's who. But yeah, just be prepared to say, to introduce yourself and to shake their hand at the start of the panel. That's pretty much standard across the board. Now, I've got these ready for you to reflect on. I think these are questions that you might get asked in the interview, but these are questions that undoubtedly the panel are going to be wondering about you and the kinds of things you've got to be prepared to talk about and give a clear picture of for the school. So they're going to be wondering who you're going to be, like what do you aim to be as a teacher? What contribution will you make? This comes back to kind of what's your motivation for going into education? Why didn't you choose law or business or accounting, or or why did you move from accounting to teaching, for example? What's motivating you? What's driving you? And guaranteed what you feel about teaching, why you think it's an important thing for you to pursue, is probably going to be someone in the school or someone on the panel who has a similar view, that are drawn to it for similar reasons, that want to make a similar impact on the world. So think about those that aspect of yourself and what's really in terms of your values and motivation. Why do you want to be there? What does teaching and learning look like in your classroom? How do you work with others? How do you build relationships? Schools are really, and a principal last week was saying to me, one of our principal panelists said, that she doesn't want, they need graduate, they understand that things aren't always going to work, that you're going to find it challenging at times. Undoubtedly, that's the experience of a graduate teacher, but they want to know that you're going to seek help, that you're not going to just suffer on your own, that you're going to reach out or, ask questions and look for mentoring support. You'll have a mentor in a school, but it might be that you need to talk to other people for support. So, and that's really, I think anyone in education who I've seen that have had long and successful careers, they're very, very well connected and have good mentoring and support mechanisms around them. You need it. So being open to making mistakes and needing to ask for guidance and getting help is something to put, it's okay to put that across. It's not a weakness in an interview. For teachers, they can see that as potential for growth, that you're coming in not knowing everything, but willing to learn. What else have you done previously? So that's, again, I think thinking about your transferable skills from volunteer work, things you've done around uni, for example, other training you've done. And the other thing, the last dot point is a tricky one, but the idea of are you a good cultural fit for this workplace? That's a really vague kind of thing. You'll never see a question saying, hello, can you tell us if you're a good cultural fit? But that's in the back of their mind. That's part of, we're social creatures. We used to live in groups. We are used to being around other people. They're going to be getting a vibe off you. And look, if you do go to an interview and you're not selected in the government system, absolutely, you should contact them and ask for some feedback. If you've only been, if you put in the written application but you didn't get to the interview stage, you can still ask the feedback, but it's very unlikely they'll be able to, they might have had 300 applications for 4 positions, and that was 4 weeks ago and, 40 classes ago. So they're probably not going to remember your application, honestly, if they've only done the written bit. But if they met you in an interview, then they'll be able to give you some genuine feedback about what you could work on. So do seek that out and do be open again. If it's a job might come up at that school down the track and you might, if that's a place for you, don't be afraid to go for it again. Every time you're selected against the pool of applicants and someone got ahead of you that day. And look, maybe they did you a favour if you didn't get selected. I like to think, maybe it wasn't, if they don't think that you're quite the right fit, then why would you want to start your career in a place where you're not the right fit? It's like, that's not going to be a pleasant experience to be there. So they might have even done you a favour if they haven't selected you, which sounds weird. That's not what we're here for. We want to get the job. But, sometimes you do get offered, you come out of the interview and you go, I didn't get a very good vibe about that school or that place. I don't think that's where I want to go. Where to from here? So I've got some tips on where you can go from here. I've kind of touched on these along the way, but I'd say recruit online for government schools, or setting up a search on Seek, or checking out the websites that Jackie's shared with us would be a good place to start. Thinking about what areas, what particular schools or roles you might want to target. I did mention, I know there'll be some secondary candidates in here. If you're looking at going to secondary, look for a job that at least has one of your subject specialisations, and absolutely expect that you'll probably end up teaching outside of those specialisations down the track. We know statistically it's very likely to happen. So, if you're like English and history, then you might go for a job that's got English, but there might be, I don't know, another subject in there. But if you feel comfortable teaching that, then you could put an application for that one. So don't feel like you've got to get your exact, both of your specialisations to secondary ticked off. Start documenting your evidence against the key selection criteria. All the professional standards for teachers are a good place to start. For other workplaces, at least you've got some dot points of evidence on hand to start writing. Think about your support crew. So you want some referees. We've talked about who they might be. You need to ask them if they're going to be a referee. You don't want to just put their details on there and they get ambushed with a phone call and can't remember who you are. I've had that happen when I've contacted a referee for someone. So talk to them, explain to them you're applying for jobs. Jackie, would you mind being my referee? Of course she would. Jackie, I'll just let you know, I've applied at Thornbury. They've got a really cool Indigenous program. I'm really excited. If Jackie knows that, Jackie's likely to retain that for when someone rings Jackie the next day and says, is Adam awesome? She'll go, oh, he's so excited about the program. Like, have that communication with your referee so they know that they're in the loop. Some people say give your referees your application to read. If they're a teacher, it's very unlikely that they will, being honest. Like, they probably don't have a lot of time to go through and read all of your application. With a bit of bribing and chocolate, they might do some proofreading for you though, or someone in your family. Proofreading is really important because a little spelling mistake can be a big distractor for a teacher. So having someone just skim through your cover letter, or you know, a friend. It doesn't have to be an education context person. It could just be a person that that's happy to do that for you. And also recent graduates. I've talked about the New Educator Network site for the AEU. That student group, students and graduates, you can post your questions in there. Early Childhood Teachers of Victoria is another really good way to access people out in the industry and recent graduates. But someone just a few steps down the track from you could be quite a valuable person to talk to. And for some of you, you might have registered. We're doing a session this afternoon with a couple of graduate teachers talking about from their own experience. So I might see some of you at that session today later on. It's an AEU student member session. And the last one, so I mentioned that one, we've got some sessions on applications and interviews. We have run one on key selection criteria and one on interviews just recently. They're on the AEU website under the recorded training sessions tab. If you're a free student member, you can log in and get access to them anytime you like, any time, night or day. And they actually will unpack in a lot more detail what we've done today and provide some more examples. So when you're in the thick of it, writing your applications or working on your interviews, you've got something that you can come back to help you with a bit more guidance, to help you hopefully land your first teaching job. Jackie, I might hand over to you because I know you've got a couple of training opportunities too for people thinking about the Catholic or independent sector.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Yeah, so it is really good. We noticed with the registrations that a lot of you aren't actually members of either union. We recommend joining both of them. It is free to join both, and then you get access to everything. And you might be saying now, like when I was studying, I definitely thought that I'd be in the public sector, and most of my friends did. But then, you know, one did his final placement in a Catholic school and they offered him a job, so he ended up there. So you don't really know where you're going to end up. But yeah, when you're a student member, you get all the access to the training. So Adam just talked about all the amazing training that they've got on the AEU website. We're running some live training over Zoom in the coming weeks. So next week, we're doing a session with someone from VIT that goes it's an hour just on VIT registration. I will send through in an email a flyer for that one that will have links to register for each session. So, and then we're also doing one on working in a non-government setting. So, you know, I touched on that very slightly today, but yeah, there are differences around pay and conditions and those sorts of things that are worth finding out about. What other session? Oh, and we're doing a Q&A panel with four principals in non-government schools. So 2 from Tasmania, because the IEU branch of the Victoria also shares with Tasmania, but 2 are also from Victoria as well. So that will be an hour and a half, and we'll have some pre-prepared questions, but you'll also have an opportunity to ask them some questions as well. So all of that will be coming up. I've also just shared a Facebook group link. It's called the Pre-Service Teachers Victoria. You don't have to be a member of either union to join that one. It's just a place. So I'm one of the admins on that group, and people often ask each other for advice, and there's lots of things shared around in there. So it's a good place to get more resources and stuff like that. I think that's it from me though.
Thanks, Jackie. And Jackie, thank you for your support with the chat box today. It's been it's impossible for me to do 2 things at once like that. My concentration span just doesn't go that far, so I had to try and keep to the slides. Thank you everyone for logging in and participating today as well. I'll stop the recording in a moment. I also want to thank you, Taylor, for having us as a guest today. Hopefully, if it has been of use to you, you might want to share that feedback in the chat box for us, so we've got a bit of a sense. I will stick around for questions, and Jackie will too. I'll stop the recording shortly, but if you've got particular questions or things that haven't been answered or you're kind of curious about, I'm very generous in my time, so I've got plenty of time to stick around and follow this up with you. But apart from that, I'll thank you very much for your attendance and for your participation today.
One more thing, sorry, I've had a couple of people message me privately throughout the session that didn't actually register and would like the email. So if that's you as well, send me your email now in the chat box so that I can add you to the list to get that email.
Alrighty, and I'm happy to field any questions you might have along the way. But if you do need to log off and get about your day, thank you very much for your attendance.